given how dire that is, that outlook, isn't it time for the states to open the borders and to allow economic growth and the recovery to start? Because while we've got nations within nations, that's going to stifle growth.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, Kieran. It's been a long day already. Good afternoon to you, Kieran, and to your viewers. The question about interstate borders is really one that needs to be informed by medical advice, and medical advice being taken by premiers through their own state health agencies. But you are right to point out that these were sobering economic statistics we heard today. What I took out of Dr. Kennedy's evidence before our committee today is that there really isn't anyone who thinks that the economy is going to snap back to so-called normal operations within the 6-month time frame that the Prime Minister has set. The RBA doesn't, the IMF doesn't, and certainly the Treasury doesn't. If you think about this, there are really kind of three takeouts from the Treasury's evidence today. One, in the short term, that the unemployment rate in reality is probably about 15% if you add in the people who left the workforce and the people who are on JobKeeper but not working. Secondly, that monetary policy is exhausted, and really we're going to be looking at a fiscal response for much longer than that 6-month snapback time frame. And then thirdly, that some $13.2 billion has been taken out of superannuation. You know, Australians, some 1.5 million Australians have reached into their private savings for support. And of those, Kieran, 2/3 are under the age of 40, which means that the economic crisis here and the policy response of the government is going to have a very long tail. We start to contemplate that if young people are taking $10,000 and $20,000 out of superannuation, that's $120,000 by the time they reach retirement. They will have missed out on.
But doesn't it show as well that the package has been designed appropriately, given the demand on that side, that people wanted to use their money now in the face of this crisis, and with this time frame for the JobKeeper? Because when you've got JobKeeper there, like you can see in Queensland at the moment, Anastasia Palaszczuk has got that, and this has been reported by my colleague Andrew Clennell today. The sense is within the federal government that because of JobKeeper, the Premier can keep her borders shut for longer. It's actually going to be stifling growth if we keep that support in there for longer than currently scheduled.
Kieran, I'm not surprised that Australians reached for their superannuation savings, because the government was quite slow in getting the JobKeeper and the JobSeeker payments out the door and into the hands of families. You know, the fact is that the JobKeeper and the one-off $750 payments that were made to people, those are only equal to about $13.4 billion. So the reality is it's been by design. It's taken some time for that government money to flow. People had no other choice but to reach into their private retirement savings. But you're right to make a point about JobKeeper, and that is that while we know that the economic recovery is going to be patchy, we also know that some sectors are going to bounce back more quickly than others. Some are going to really struggle to bounce back. And what that says is that we can't have a policy response from the government that simply yanks it away in 6 months' time just because that was the arbitrary date set by the Prime Minister. What the government needs to do in its fiscal policy settings is look at what's happening in workplaces, look at what's happening in industries, look at what is happening in families, and make sure that whether we're tailoring or tapering JobKeeper, but we're not just snapping it away from families while this economic crisis is continuing.
While you rightly say the state borders issue is a matter for the states, it's also the JobKeeper matter and support is distorting some of those decisions, because while it's a policy, a very welcome policy, because it's kept millions of people in their jobs and connected to their employers, if it's there for too long, it'll stifle the recovery, won't it? How long does Labor want it in place for?
Well, Labor has always said that what we want to see is a response that meets the economic conditions and the challenges that families are facing, not some arbitrary snapback just because the Prime Minister said it in a media conference a few weeks ago that everything would snap back to normal in 6 months' time. But Karen, I think this goes to the importance of these COVID committee hearings. A couple of weeks ago, we heard from Treasury that there is a concern about the implementation of JobKeeper and the idea about zombie businesses. We've heard that from other sectors as well, that JobKeeper could potentially distort in that way. I think the importance of these hearings, providing oversight. Today we heard that the list of companies that receive JobKeeper will not be public. And this comes on the back of reports in media that there are some companies that look like they're doing very well from the outside that are claiming JobKeeper. And so there are a lot of questions, I think, about the implementation. I want to be clear, Karen, with you and with your viewers. We support JobKeeper. It is a direct wage subsidy. We called for it. The government, resisted it for some time. They did an about face. We thank them for that. We acknowledge that it is a good idea to have a direct wage subsidy. But we do have frustrations. This is a good idea that we say is being implemented badly. And you have gaps such as a university student now making more because they're on JobKeeper than they did before the crisis, and a university staff member, whether they are an administrator or a lecturer, who's had to go onto JobSeeker because the government's excluded universities from JobKeeper. It's that type of disparity, those types of gaps that really do need to be addressed by the government in the implementation of this program.
The Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, is talking about today reopening the borders to international students to get that sector that you referred to, universities back on their feet. The federal government is also looking at this now to get COVID-safe campuses and to get that sector up and going again. Do you welcome that?
Labor has always said that we would welcome the return of international students when it's safe to do so. The real question here is, how do you make it safe to do that? And that is a question of policy for the federal government, first and foremost, because as you've heard me say many a time in relation to the Ruby Princess, when it comes to our borders, the buck stops with the Commonwealth. It's not the Premier of New South Wales or any aspect of the New South Wales government to make a determination about who can come through the borders. It is the Commonwealth government. The real question is, how can that be done safely? And how can it be done in a way that is economical? And I think the real question I would have here right now is, who is going to pay for that? Is that a cost that's going to be borne by the taxpayer, by the university, by a state, or indeed by the university student, the international student? These are questions I think need to be answered in the design of any program.
Senator Keneally, as always, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.